Hey, welcome back everyone to the Black Brain Trust. This is Black Politics, episode 909. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust. There's a document description beneath the video for you to follow along with and reference. And I'm also here with my co-host and panelists, Nagona 11 and Renaissance Man.
Hey, what's going on, Mike?
Hey, welcome back, everyone.
All right. So after the smoke is clear, by now everybody knows what the results are for the 2024 election. What we know is that Trump won the election, not by the numbers that we initially thought that he would, but nonetheless he won 74 million votes to Kamala Harris's current 70 million votes at the moment, and 301 electoral votes to 226 for Kamala Harris. Let me go around and ask Renaissance, starting with you. What's your take on what exactly happened? From your vantage point, how did this happen?
I've listened over the past couple of days several theories. I originally was kind of against it, but it sounds like there's some legs to it. I think that there was a messaging issue. You know, I saw an article in CNN where several down ballot Democrats said they had expressed to the Biden administration earlier on in the year that, hey, your message on economics and immigration is not breaking through. One of these people were actually in a border district, I believe in the Rio Grande Valley. And they were saying, hey, you know, my constituents are coming up to me. There's economic issues there that they're not really getting messaging out of the administration, as well as the immigration issue. So I think that was definitely an issue there, as well as I believe Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries came out and told the administration, hey, you need to sharpen your messaging as well. That's where I'm kind of seeing it landing. I mean, I do think the obvious things is I think there is an element of sexism and racism in this, because if you look at the way the two campaigns were run, it was day and night as far as like what Kamala Harris did versus what Trump did. I actually think Harris ran one of the best campaigns I've seen. Obviously, she raised a ton of money, lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, but at the end of the massive get out the vote campaign. But at the end of the day, it turned into, or she was not able to get her people to come out, despite, you know, all of those things, because she ended up getting, Trump ended up losing about 3 million votes from where he was last time. And she was down by, I believe, about like 15 million, if I'm correct, from where Biden was, something along those lines.
Yes.
So there's obviously it became a turnout issue, which is wild, because when Democratic enthusiasm is that high, you usually think it's going to be a turnout election. As far as the map goes, though, it's not surprising in the sense of, hey, you know, I thought it was going to be a sweep of 7 one way for Harris. It turns out it's going to be a sweep the other way. You know, that's kind of the most likely scenario if you look at someone like Nate Silver, is that, you know, the winner was probably going to sweep the swing stakes. So that was not as surprising to me, but I think that was a major issue. I've heard people also suggest that, hey, Dems kind of maybe abandoned the working class. I can agree with that message if it's coming from the angle of like someone like a William Barber. I have a little bit of trouble struggling with what Bernie, when he lays it out, because Bernie's constituency seems to be more of a Midwestern or that white working class voter that Democrats seem to always mythically chase, who's voting Republican, versus Dr. Reverend William Barber is very much focused more on, you know, poor and low wage people, mainly in the South and Appalachia. So his coalition is a lot of it's very racially mixed black and brown folks, and he basically makes the argument that, hey, the South is not actually red, it's blue, it just has to actually be turned out. So depending on who that message comes from, it makes a little bit more sense. But I mean, those are the two things that seem to at least somewhat stand out for me. I know there's been some critique too, as that, hey, you know, some people don't think that that Kamala Harris should have been campaigning with Liz Cheney. So
Interesting analysis, Nagone. From your vantage point in New York, you're a longtime New Yorker. You've seen many elections, a lot more so than both of us. What's your take on post-analysis as to what happened?
Well, what I can see is really there was a big issue, certainly, I feel, with getting our people out. The messaging was definitely an issue. I've always, we thought that was the case, but more so than anything else, along with the messaging, didn't get the people out at the levels that I thought we were going to see in what was considered to be a high turnout election. We looked at about 13 million less people kind of really came out there and voted. We saw, even a drop, even in our population, Black population, as far as how we voted, we came out less. So there was less of a turnout for our people, and I had to give, the Trumpers credit. They came out. They did come out. They were very motivated to come out more. Not that even so much more came out this time than the last, because that really wasn't the case so much. But they did come out more than people on the Democratic side. So that, I think, played pretty much a key role. Of course, we saw that absolutely happen within the swing states, which played a role. And we also looked at numbers. It seems as though Trump has even won the popular vote. So he had more people turn out. So he had more people turn out for him. So really looking at that, it was a function of turnout. I think there was a great degree of, I would almost say, misinformation that was put out there that people were confused about, didn't really know. And what it did, I think, a lot of people just didn't turn out. A lot of people weren't as excited as we thought they were going to be, but not as many people were excited as that much to come out and vote. And we did have a drop in that, even though we had some gains in some of the registrations. We also did see a lot of gains also in registrations with Republicans as well. They were certainly very motivated to come out. They came out and voted a little bit harder. And I think that's where it came down to. The messaging, we can get into that. We can get into these other key issues as far as whole information piece was concerned. But Trump and his crew were able to get their people out. And even though the Democrats had a great ground game, we had a very good ground game, still, they came out, and they came out a lot, and they voted. And that's really what it comes down. It comes down to numbers. And that's where it is. I know there was some who were saying that there were some issues with respect to voter suppression. Some people were removed from the voting rolls and so forth, and we saw some numbers there, of which I would say, okay, that's certainly fair enough. But as of 13 million and above, being utterly removed to knock you out of the box, no, I don't think we saw that. I don't think it certainly was that high. So we did see some we did see some issues there, but really the Trumpers came out more. They came out, they voted, and we can handicap this and do more of a post-mortem. But that's what we're really looking at. Their messaging got their people out. However that messaging was, even some of that messaging may have, not been as accurate, not been true, and people could say whatever. It motivated their people to get out to the polls. So we got outvoted.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with both of your analysis. Here's what I posture as well. My three perspectives on this. Whiteness was on the ballot. I think when it came to Latinos, the Latino vote, especially Latino males, they voted their way into the whiteness of the Republican Party, because that's the base of the party is white and male for Republicans. And so the idea that Democrats, like to what Renaissance point was earlier, that they kind of left the working class, I don't think that was the case. I completely disagree with that. And here's why. Democrats talked about the UAW, United Auto Workers, Teamsters, SEIU, all these other unions that are actually a part of that big conglomerate of the working class. So the idea that Democrats did not play to that and they left the base behind is bunk at this point. The whole campaign has been filled with that. In fact, if you go back to 2019 when Joe Biden first ran for the 2020 election, he was out there in Somerville, Massachusetts, with the Stop and Shop workers, the union workers, out there on the picket line with them. In fact, that's how he launched his whole entire campaign, was from the picket line. So the idea that the Democratic Party in Biden, the administration, that even down to Harris, somehow abandoned the working class and they forgot about the working class. This is not true. That's just bunk. And so I think that whiteness became a factor in a lot of things, but white rage was what was boiling for Republicans. And the other factor here is that there's this idea that, from the whiteness being on the ballot, that we need to send Trump to Washington, D.C. I'm saying this for Republican MAGA voters, that we need to send Trump to Washington, D.C. to burn down Washington, D.C. Because it's big government that's the problem with inflation and everything else. Even though Democrats inherited the inflation from the pandemic that this guy had caused, right? The facts didn't matter at the end of the day for them. And so I think that that's what drove Latino voters, even some of these, non-black, non-white voters, these sort of Indians or Pakistanis, other Asians. I think that's what you started to see with some of these swing voters not really get in line with Democrats, but actually swing to Republicans and cast their ballot there. The second part here is the disinformation. The disinformation campaign was incredible. I haven't seen anything like this before, but they've been working on this for a long time, right? And so when you think about them talking about Kamala as a DEI hire, they had already started off with that. Governor Westmore was a DEI hire. Mayor Brandon Scott was a DEI hire. They had already started that campaign, attacking based on race, back in July, back in June as well. And then the other factor I think contributed to that was calling her a Marxist, calling her a communist. Her father's a Marxist. She's a communist. She's a socialist, right? These ideas of you can't trust her because of her economic policies. But if you look at Biden-Harris's agenda over the last 4 years, then it's obvious that, they did a lot of heavy lifting that was not done in the previous administration, but the facts don't matter then. So the misinformation was very strong. And also the message about inflation. Inflation right now is at the same level, below 2.8 or something like that, 2.9 today that it was in 2019 during Trump's administration. That doesn't seem to matter to voters. And so a lot of price gouging going on, but no one talks about that. And the same price gouging that's going on right now, a lot of those entities came out of the Trump administration with nice, handsome bailouts and whatnot during the pandemic. So there's no real reason for them to actually be price gouging at this point. And I also think the third factor here is the party strategy. I think party strategy was in disarray from the beginning. I think that Biden, after the special 8 elections that they won in 2023, I think that he should have stepped down then. And I think that he should have actually decided to have the primary and then, see if anybody wants to go up against Kamala and then play it out from there. And that would have gave them, 13 month runway time before the DNC convention to actually get to that point. And they would have gave her a lot of runway. As it stands right now, in order to launch a campaign, you need at least 1,000 feet for takeoff, and she only had like 300 feet for takeoff, and that wasn't sufficient enough to get anything really going. And so I think that, there's a lot of blame to be pointed out, and I don't think it has anything to do with Kamala Harris as a person, as a candidate, as an elected official, and just in general for the for the nominee. I don't think it has anything to do with her at all. I think if you replace Kamala with Josh Shapiro, or you replace Josh Shapiro or Kamala with Newsom or J.B. Pritzker or Andy Bashir, they would have ended in the same catastrophic mess that this had turned out to be. And so I don't think that it's fair for people to put the blame on Kamala, but I do think that Democrats do have some infrastructure issues that need to be ironed out in regards to how they dealt with Biden and how they were going to move forward. I think that Biden should have stepped down after the special elections in the State of the Union speech and gave Kamala a lot of runway. At the end of the day, I don't foresee anybody going up against Kamala at that time anyways. Who would want to go up against her while she's sitting as a VP? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so at least not from a strategy standpoint, even if you did have the open convention in the primary. Renaissance?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree on the disinformation. A lot of these Hispanic voters actually, especially the non-English speaking, they get a lot of their information from the internet and through WhatsApp apparently. And a lot of the misinformation is actually in Spanish, so it's even harder to sort of correct some of this stuff. The other thing too is I saw a breakdown of basically of the Latino community that people of Mexican descent actually voted 60% for Harris. I think I saw Cubans were like 57% Trump, which has kind of been expected. But I think it was South Americans, like 66% broke for Trump as well too. So a little bit of nuance of, some areas of the community voted in different ways than others in that regard. So I think that, as we go and look back through this and ask why, that, there's a little bit more nuance that people have to drill down into. The other thing too is I agree with you. I never really bought into the rhetoric of Dems not having a working class message because, black people are working class and, black folks voted I think Kamala got like 87%, and actually the two highest groups, who supported Kamala was actually black women at 93%, and then I saw Jewish women at 88%. And then black men, I believe, were at like 85, 82, maybe something like that. And then Jewish men are around like 79%. So, these two demographics, economics very different for the respective communities, sort of got what was going on here as far as like, what's at stake with, fascism and democracy and all of those things, versus like, to your point, other groups who seem to be, voting for almost assimilation within the Republican Party and greater whiteness as well.
I think Democrats make the mistake of assuming that Latino is this blanket all for for how all Spanish-speaking people think, and Puerto Ricans only became a factor in the last week before the election until Madison Square Garden, right? And so the assumption here is that because Puerto Ricans were insulted, that would translate over to Mexicans, that would translate over to Cubans and other Nicaraguans and Guatemalans and so on and so forth. But that did not really play out that well. But that's primarily because that goes to my first point about whiteness being on the ballot, that they don't see themselves from an identity standpoint that the Democratic Party sees it, right? The Democratic Party just says, oh, Latinx, Latino, right? But in reality, Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Nicaraguans, Guatemalans, and all those other groups have really intricate nuance that you can't really figure out, because even Puerto Rican men and Puerto Rican women vote differently. Especially depending on their age range, they just vote differently. We saw that when it came to Harris, Latino women came out for Harris, but Latino men did not. And so that sort of nuance really is really important for Democrats to understand, that when you micro target is really important. It's important to understand that Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania and Cubans in Florida and Venezuelans in Florida are going to be completely different than your Dominicans in New York, for that matter, right? And so it's difficult because the Democratic Party is such a big tent party that you have to cater to all of these sort of salami slices of people or demographics within your party, and how do you engage that? As a technologist, as a cybersecurity person, I think that there is some opportunity for AI to really start doing some data analysis and really targeting these sort of demographics in these regions and in these states and in these voting districts. I think you can get a tally as to how they think and how they move and what they're looking at on social media, and kind of narrow down what they're how to micro target and strategize against for them. But I do think that Democrats made a big mistake in thinking that the Latino vote was one big vote that they can take advantage of, and that didn't really work out all that well. And that's just a lesson learned that they're gonna have to walk away with. Also, Biden's approval rating was around 41% at the time of dropping out. So he didn't really have a whole lot of runway to play with, even if he stayed in the race. I would have preferred that he had stayed in the race to November and then stepped down around that January mark and just hand it over, because he just didn't have the approval rating, and he just wasn't physically capable of going all the way into November. Although his speech yesterday, he looks really healthy, right? He looked really good, but he needs a lot of rest in order to look like that, right? He needs a lot of space and a lot of time to look like that. And I think with the first debate, he just was not prepared for it. Probably dehydrated. More than likely, he had COVID or of some sort, allergies or something like that. He just was not prepared for it. I think had he had 10 days of rest, I think he would have done better. We would be having a different conversation. Nagone, what's your thoughts on what Renaissance has had to just say?
Yeah, some of that I agree with. I look at the Latino community as certainly not monolithic. That's for sure. And like most communities, or most communities that we look at are not monolithic. Mm-hmm. So Latino community certainly was not. And they're kind of taking on somewhat of the kind of classical immigrant type of how would I say type of mindset. After a generation or two that have been here, they're going to move, the earliest ones who come over, they're going to kind of be a little bit more open, a little bit more liberal to certain things, because it kind of gears towards them as more of them come over and more of them kind of get settled in over time. They tend to move more towards that kind of conservative bent. Very much like how we saw with classic immigration groups like Italians, Greeks, and Irish and Poles and so forth. Very liberal first when they came over, and then of course as time went on, they became, moving more conservatively to that extent. So I think we're looking at that and experiencing some of that, certainly with the Latino community, which is not monolith, and people are coming here in some different ways. Not everyone may see things exactly the same. So you're seeing some of those differences going on inside of their community as well. But so they certainly played a role. We can definitely talk about a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, you had to get the message down to get your vote out and get your people out and have more of them come out and come to the polls than the oppositions. That was very key here, and that's kind of where things didn't work out as well. I know the numbers are still coming in, so we're still breaking a lot of that down, mm-hmm. and seeing kind of what a lot of that really looks like, and seeing where we really are and what really did happen. But that's kind of what we're getting so far. I do believe the misinformation campaign played very big. It was played at a very, 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 very large level, and a lot of people just weren't getting a lot of the truth. I know the Democrats have had some issues. You're having people coming at each other now inside of the party. And those are saying, "Hey, listen, we didn't get our message out the way we wanted." There are those who would disagree and say that we got the message out. But obviously there was some level of a disconnect because not everyone saw things the same, and not everyone who was out there who voted, got that message as well as they should have. So there was some issues, and we saw that it resulted in votes not going a certain way, and a lot of people not coming out. We had certainly people not coming out. When we talk about the Black community, we had a lot sit on the couch as well, and that tends not to play well for us. So a lot of things went on in this election. I do think certainly at the bottom line of it, as was said, this was a referendum very much on that white power structure community, if you will, the largest, that larger sector, and everyone trying to become a part of that, even the immigrants and so forth, everyone getting white adjacent, and really keeping that kind of power structure in place. That's what this is about, because when we really look at it, didn't really get a lot into, when we started talking about even more about, let's say, issues or when we really get into a policy, that it didn't mean a lot to a lot of people. It just meant, hey, listen, we are a large group of folks here in this country. We are the majority. Many of us feel like we're being left behind. That's not going to happen. We're going to make sure we change that, and we're going to come out and vote very, very, very aggressively for our sake. And I think a lot of that came across, and those people did come out, and that was a big part of this election. Big part of it. And go ahead.
Yeah, when it came to one of the polls, the exit polls, the question was, who do you think, based on the candidate, who do you think would be better at solving the economy today? Trump at 72% and Harris at 48%. I thought that was a ridiculous, and I was pretty surprised at it, but I thought it was pretty ridiculous to say who can solve the economy when inflation is below, is at the same rate today as it was in 2019. Quarter over quarter job growth,
4% unemployment. 4% unemployment.
4% unemployment. Infrastructure spending is at the all-time high. Drill baby drill as a policy. Trump's favorite policy initiative. They're already pumping at maximum peak right now. And you take into consideration all the infrastructure development that's happening in the private sector when it comes to semiconductors, data centers, broadband expansion, electric vehicle rollout for school buses and electric charging stations. I think they pushing for 1 million charging stations right now. And you start talking about cycling networks, these sort of bike paths, protected bike lanes and things like that. All that sort of development happened under Biden. This all happened under Biden. But the question is posed as if there's something wrong with the economy. When you look at the portfolio for Biden and you see how much work is being done, how is it possible to even ask a question like that and then get this guy, Trump, to have 72% approval, while at the same time, Kamala, who's been there from day one, working on all this stuff, she gets like 48% approval.
Well, I think one thing I read, and I think inflation hurt Biden because he did do a tremendous job, and I think history will look more favorably on that as we get further away. I did see something, I believe it was in the Financial Times. They were highlighting the fact that across the world, in every developed country, all of the incumbencies have either lost seats or lost the election in their respective countries. And that's because of inflation. So I think part of it here could be too as well, is that Kamala was essentially swimming upstream because people basically felt that, and I think Dems may have made a mistake here too, that, they let Republicans basically say, oh, well, the inflation came from stimulus checks and, spending, versus like, hey, inflation came from everybody having inflation. And I do know too, like on the economy issue, part of that is, once again, I think Democrats let them frame the question incorrectly and don't challenge the framing, because I've heard people say that, okay, A, Harris was closing that gap, but then B, too, if you go a step lower and ask them, like, okay, who do you think is going to be better for your family? Who's going to stand up more for policies that benefit you? Harris wins plus 20 on those. But if you say, oh, who's better, who's going to manage the economy better? Well, the bias goes to Trump because apparently he was this businessman and, inflation was lower under him. So I think that's part of the issue as well.
Yeah, as he was leaving office, you did, inflation became a factor back in 2020. And then, as Biden took office, you started to see it really start to, percolate and move its way up. And so, it looks like Biden is responsible for it. But, the whole Inflation Reduction Act was based on what was coming. They had already saw this coming based on, what had happened in the last administration that drove a lot of this. And so it's unfortunate that the facts don't get out there. And that's a part of the disinformation campaign is to spin this idea that there's so much chaos in the White House and no one knows what to do. But when you really look at what's actually happening, the White House has been very, very, very productive. I don't think some people really understand that. It's been very productive. You really had very few people who have left the administration under the pretense that there's nothing going on here for them to stick around for. With the exception of like Marsha Fudge, all of Biden's appointees have been pretty much steadfast in working under him, and they did a lot of work. I think Pete Buttigieg doesn't get a lot of credit, but he has done some incredible work in the DOT. I think when the hurricane had hit in last month, and people were saying, and Trump ran that misinformation campaign on FEMA spending, right? And so this idea that the government can't help you or the Biden administration is not helping you. You saw some Republican mayors and some governors come out and say, hey, well, that's not necessarily true. Please stop saying these sort of things. But that once it's out, right? And then that stuff kind of metastasizes and it moves around through X, which is owned by Elon Musk. You were blasted with all sorts of misinformation on a consistent basis, no matter what the account was or whatever, wherever you was. That's all I had in my timeline was nothing but misinformation. And so people thought that the money that the $750 was somehow a slap to the face, when that's exactly the standard that FEMA works with. And the reason why FEMA didn't have a whole lot of money in the cash reserves was because the Republicans voted against it, funding FEMA. But that message doesn't get out there, and so Kamala is forced to backtrack. Even Biden had to come out and say something, and then it was too late. It just snowballed, and so misinformation, was really a critical factor here, or I should say, the disinformation campaign was a critical factor, and I think that there was nothing that she could do about that. There's nothing you can do in regards to saying that or trying to counter a lot of that misinformation. Now, I know they put a lot of fact checking on FEMA's website, but the megaphone that Trump has, it's incredible to go up against. You're just not gonna be able to counter that at the same time run a campaign. It's almost impossible for her to do that. Biden tried to get in front of it. He called it like something coming out of a comic book, that Marjorie Taylor Greene or one of these other congressional members had said that the government controls the weather. And what's interesting about this, that I find interesting, is that the idea is that the government is just so bad in Washington D.C. that I'm going to vote for somebody to go to Washington D.C. and represent me and my values in the same place that I want to see burned down. I think there's a lot of polarization in how the voters think, and I don't know if facts work in a campaign like this. I don't think that works. I think you can say, you had infrastructure, you put out infrastructure jobs, roads and bridges, and electrical lines, renewable energy, wind turbines, solar power, battery storage. All of this was happening under Biden. None of this was happening under Trump at all. And so people look at this and they're like, it's just so bad. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There's a lot of things that's going on here, and this guy is basically saying, I'm here to solve the economy. But how? What exactly are you solving? And so I don't know, man. People are too polarized, man, at the ballot. They really believe that everything that Trump was saying was true and that nothing was going on. And the map that we're looking at right now kind of shows what America really is going to look like for the next, probably for the next decade or so, if this guy stays in office. And I don't know if he's going to be able to get anything done, because if he's going to reverse a lot of Biden's policies, what more are you going to be able to do? Nicole?
I think a lot of that is correct. Certainly, he's definitely going to reverse a lot of Biden's policies, just to say he's doing his own thing. There are going to be a lot of issues with respect to that as well. It's how things function and move. So I think we're going to see some problems with some of that, and we're going to see some economic issues as well. But I guess we're just going to have to go through that at this period. I don't really know much more else to say, except these guys are getting ready to come into office in January, and I certainly think for us as Afro-Americans, we're gonna we're gonna understand what this is truly all about. I think we're really gonna understand that, and I think we're just gonna have to really kind of get ready for a lot of this for what's getting ready to come down.
Let me ask you this, because you're from New York. The idea here, let me hover my mouse over the map here. Trump was at 43% in regards to votes compared to Kamala. And a lot of people were saying, well, Trump could have almost taken New York. Is that the sentiment that's going on in New York right now? Like that, Trump is moving up in popularity? Is it like what are you seeing on the ground, or what are you hearing?
What I'm basically seeing is you have your pockets of New York, in like Staten Island, certain parts of Queens, and certain parts of Westchester County, where I'm in, and so forth. Have always been with Trump. Have always been, but those have always been they've been in the minority. Some places out in Long Island and other places. So you'll have some areas that tend to be with Trump, and they were always there. But as far as Trump gaining a great degree of popularity and so forth, that really has not really been the case here. And we looked at the votes. He didn't do a hell of a lot better in New York than he did before. So his numbers are are kind of where they're at. Maybe he caught a little bit as far as growing, but he's not. That's not growing. And the people who were saying he made flip New York didn't know what they were talking about. So people can say whatever, but they had no clue as to what they were talking about. And the numbers reflect that. But you do have pockets here in New York, in New York State, that definitely would support him, but they are not in the majority. And when we look here in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs, which is the majority of the state, is when you go much further upstate, it's pretty desolate. It's almost like frontier land in some ways, for going way further upstate New York, but or even moving out westerly, out towards certainly going to Pennsylvania, moving more towards the Midwest, if you will, where the Great Lakes are, and then as you move over the Great Lakes, then you're in Ohio and so forth. But going out to the western part of New York, you'll see a little bit more, but a little bit more, let's say, support for, let's say, the right wing, but the numbers are just not there. We have the large numbers in the 5 boroughs in Manhattan and so forth. You're looking at about 13 million people. So the numbers are just too great in this area. So as far as them really taking over New York, no, that just was not very realistic, Mike. And that wasn't ever even an issue. It wasn't an issue here in this state. So if anybody was thinking about, New York flipping, read, that was not a factor. It wasn't realistic.
Renaissance, when it comes to rebuilding the party at this point, going forward, it's likely that Kamala is not going to run again. Tim Walz will go off into the sunset. You do have some key races, some congressional races that will, some Senate races that were won. Also, Brooks in Maryland won, and there was also another race in Delaware that was won. 2 Black women making history. What's your take on those 2 races that came up there? I think Renaissance took off. I think when it comes to rebuilding the party, I think we need to focus on those House seats. Out of the 224, you're going to need the 218. That's going to be really important going forward. The numbers still have not come back yet on those seats. Let me look at it in here. Yeah, Dems flipped 5 seats. So I think because the jury's still out, we won't know anything until maybe next week or so, like that, as to all the votes coming back. But I definitely think that this is going to be really key. Getting Hakeem Jeffries up to the top of the ticket in terms of the House. And I think when it comes to rebuilding the party, because we lost the Senate, the Democrats lost the Senate. That's pretty much a wrap at this point. But when it comes to rebuilding the party, what I would say here is this: governors who are in these strong positions in Massachusetts, in New York, in Minnesota, in Illinois, in California especially, need to focus on maintaining the ship. Build the party from within. We get to 2026. We got a couple of races that's going to be really critical. You got Ossoff that's going to be up for re-election. That's going to be really critical. And then you have another race as well in 2026 as well. So, got to be able to maintain whatever seats that we do have in the Senate. But those congressional seats are going to be really important. But I do think that governors and mayors have to be willing to fight, because there's a big probability that whatever federal dollars you were getting before under the Biden administration, that's going to go away under Trump. You're not going to get that type of stuff anymore. All those niceties that were coming down, not going to happen. You're going to have to start penny pinching in terms of how you guys manage budgets and things like that. When it comes to infrastructure spending and some of these more major projects that need to be worked on. I know that the Biden-Harris administration had worked on a lot of climate impact initiatives under the EPA. We don't even know if the EPA is going to be here this time next year. That can go away as well. And then Department of Energy, there was a lot of niceties that came out of the Department of Energy that was funneled to the states that were critical. And then you've got the Chips and Science Act. We don't know where the funding is going to come for that. Trump may come in and dismantle that whole entire thing, or what's left of it, and then leave a lot of those blue states in the dust and not necessarily have anything to work with. And so I think Democratic governors start working together, start communicating with each other. Mayors start communicating with each other, especially the Black mayors in Milwaukee and in Atlanta, and as well as Philadelphia. Karen Bass as well. I think people need to really start getting on the phone and start having Zoom calls and start really organizing and start rebuilding the party from within, and start focusing on more down ballot seats. Whether it's state Senate seats, as well as state representative seats. When you start talking about school board seats, all of these sort of areas that were overlooked in this election cycle has to be taken seriously. Starting next week. Got to start paying attention to a lot of the down ballot ideas. Renaissance man, are you there?
I don't know if his mic is off. You know, I still see he's still one of the participants. I don't know if something's wrong with his mic. But anyway,
closing thoughts.
Yeah, we definitely have to come up with a strategy. Certainly for down ballot. Certainly 50 states as far as how we're going to handle that. Certainly play a stronger role in how we can do it. However we can do it, controlling more of the narrative and keeping some really good information out there, even though the mainstream media or the big press may not try to put a lot out there. Get methods to really get out there and get your message out. That's going to be very important. And certainly really count on, like you said, those congressional seats and so forth. And we have to work at state legislation is going to play a very key role because they're going to be gerrymandering a lot of seats or keeping seats gerrymandered. They're going to be trying to push more Republican Congress in there. So there's a very, very, very heavy agenda that the Democrats are really going to have to get with and play if they're to survive. What's going to be coming down the pike? Because if they're not, things are going to be tough. So we have a lot of work. Certainly a lot of work ahead. And it's certainly not going to be very easy. And you're going to have an opponent that's really going to be doing everything they can to stop you at every turn. So you're going to have to really put that together. I would say for Black people, sure, increase your civics knowledge. Be very sharp about what's going on because there are going to be some funky curves being thrown that some people are not going to be expecting to see. And I just want people to be aware of what might be coming down the pike and keep your eyes open. What you may think is going to be so good for you may not. Keep your eyes open politically and stay very, very, very knowledgeable of what's going on, especially in your communities, in your areas, because I think some of these policies that are going to come down are going to affect you, or are going to affect you and us greatly. So I just want us to be awake as far as that's concerned as well. Anyway.
As well as political literacy, I think that there needs to be some form of schoolhouse rock or some form of educational aspect to engaging voters. I don't know if they put it on their website or they put it on a QR code or they really start holding some Saturday morning, Sunday morning classes for folks in public libraries and start engaging them and helping them and bringing them up to speed on how the system works. There are a lot of people, even in the Democratic Party, who really don't understand what the role of the VP was. People were blaming her, saying, she was the border czar and she didn't fix the border. What are you talking about? That's not her job, right? They don't even understand the role of the VP. They don't understand the separation between the VP and the POTUS. And I think that that's really important. But I think personally they got a lot of work done with regards to legislation. I think they did a lot of heavy lifting that the previous administration just couldn't even fathom. This guy said infrastructure week, every single week, and nothing ever came from that. No infrastructure was done, and so Biden came in and immediately started launching projects almost overnight. Especially in Pennsylvania, where that bridge collapsed when he, a few hours before he even got there. And we know now why it collapsed, because it was negated, during the Trump administration, which is a shame because he doesn't get any of the blame for that. That bridge was in dire need and they should have attended to that. But, all in all, I think there were a lot of lessons learned, and we know now that you can run a campaign from 0 to 60 like a startup. Kamala was in her founder mode, as they say, launching a startup, and she figured out how to launch a startup from from nothing to 110 days, and raised $1 billion. That's unheard of in American history. So
she did a fantastic job. And hey, it was historic, but it still didn't achieve ultimate victory. I think she had a little more time, things might have even gone better.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know. So
yeah,
we are where we are. So let's take it from here.
All right, thank you all for joining us, and please hit the like button on the way out, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust.